got back from 10 days in Turkey, and I didn't even know until just before we went on the trip that all 7 churches in Revelation are in Turkey. Silly me, right? I see it on the map all the time, but it's like Smyrna is modern day Izmir, and we actually spent a night in Izmir. And just the changes of names, you just hard to keep everything in context. So I have a couple maps that hopefully will help you in orienting yourself geographically. But what an amazing trip. It wasn't an easy trip. It was kind of a 7 to 7 kind of thing. And I learned that Turkey serves dinner at 7. And so you get back at 6:37, and then you have dinner, and then I tell you, by the time 8:30, 9 o'clock runs out, you're like, Somebody asked me how my time was with my wife, and I'm like, I'm not sure we really... Let me think about that for a second, right? I don't think there was much bonding time. I think it was just pass out time. But we enjoyed traveling together. But there wasn't a lot of reflection and rest time, but it was a rewarding trip. So I hope to pass on to you today. We're going to start, hopefully we'll just get through the first of the 7 churches, which is Ephesus, the church that the book of Ephesians is written to. And it's a really beautiful study. But as we get there, 7 churches of Revelation is our topic. But here's our geography. So Istanbul is right here on the upper section. Really unique place because it's the only country that's on 2 continents. So this is actually Europe, and this is all considered Asia, and it's separated by this strait, and Istanbul's right here. The wealth perspective of deep water ports, it's a really special and unique spot. We flew into Istanbul, and then we went to Izmir, which is right here, Izmir. So it's kind of like central and west on the coastline. And this is Samos, and right here is Patmos. If you can see the little island right there, so that's the island that John the Revelator was exiled to. Various scholars in different lengths of time, from a year to 3 years potentially, on Patmos, but that's where he had the revelation. And I learned a lot about John on this trip. One of the things that I learned about John is that he was actually the one who started the Ephesian church, and probably all of the other 7 churches that this book is written to as well. That's interesting. So in my head, of course, Jerusalem is, everybody talks about Jerusalem, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And that is, of course, where Christianity started. It's where Christ was crucified and resurrected and where the whole thing began. But the actual explosion of Christianity happened from Ephesus, which is the church that we're going to talk about today. That's where everything began. Virtually every other church came out of the persecution that happened in Jerusalem, shoving people out of Israel. And this is where John settled, and we'll learn in a little bit, but he took Mary with him. So the world that Christianity was born into. So I just thought this would be helpful to just give a little bit of a chronology of where it is that John is writing this letter to. So we know that Rome was burned in AD 64, right? So Nero burned Rome and blamed it on the Christians, and we have a pretty dramatic persecution, as if it wasn't already pretty significant, but it intensified dramatically after that point. So Nero was AD 54 to 68. Then Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70, and just before that, John moves to Ephesus, and this is where he starts the Ephesian church. But if you remember on the cross, Jesus says to John and to Mary, Mary, consider your son, son, consider your mother. They adopt each other right there by the words of Christ. And John took Mary with him when he left Jerusalem, when the persecution was just so intense. We got to go to the place in Turkey right near Ephesus. Ephesus is up on one hill, and on the other side of the valley is a place where they know that at least 7 years Mary lived. And it was really special, and my wife will share about that. Domitian became Caesar AD 81 to 86, and we had a whole nother realm of persecution started. Ephesus had at least 14 different temples to all sorts of different gods and goddesses. No one compared to Artemis or Diana. Temple to Artemis is stunning, and I have a rendition of it here later on in the slides. But there was also Caesar worship all throughout, and Domitian took that really seriously. Of all of the polytheism that you may participate in, everyone is going to worship Caesar. He chose Ephesus as his home base, where everything started, and he built a 50-foot statue to himself in Ephesus. And I'll show you at the Agora, at the marketplace in Ephesus, they had an incense burner. And so everyone had to go, just at the entryway, everyone had to go and offer incense to Caesar before they even went into the marketplace. It's kind of significant because it's really helpful to understand what pressures they were in at the time. And when I walked through Ephesus, particularly, personally, what's on my mind is, okay, so how do we get it done in a very similar culture right here in our town? It's not all that different. That's really my conclusion. Technology is different. Transportation is different. Big whoop, right? It's not that different. And to understand what the Christians were dealing with in that time, in actually some ways it was far worse. We still live in a country that, however much fleeting it is, was founded on these fundamental concepts of unalienable rights and of God-given unalienable rights given by our Creator. And that's really profound, because you can't take them away if you didn't give them. If you're my leader and you didn't give them, that's why everyone is to be bound to the Constitution. So even though there's parts of that we absolutely need to be very vigilant about, praying for and preserving and walking in and being involved in on our sphere of influence and what we can do, it's also not the world that they lived in. When you had to go and give incense, can you imagine being a Christian, being a follower of Jesus, and to go and participate in the market, you had to violate that I'm a worshiper of Jesus. I'm a follower of Jesus. I've sworn off all of those demon idols, right? I don't do that. How would that have affected your daily life? There were over 4,000 booths in the Agora. Huge, right there in Ephesus. The center of commerce. And because it was a port city, which is really kind of interesting because the Aegean Sea that you saw there, it's actually retreated about 6 miles from where it was in Jesus' day. So Ephesus was literally on the water, was a port city. And the farther the water moves away, there was actually like 6 sites right around that area where it's like Ephesus 1, Ephesus 2, to Ephesus 6, right? There's like 6 of them. And parts of them include parts of others, but it's because they have pretty intense earthquakes in Turkey among conquests. But the earthquakes are actually the things that have damaged it more than anything. Maybe it relates to the earthquakes, why the sea receded so far. But 6 miles is a long ways to pack your goodies. So, but at the time when it was right there at the port, 4,000 booths selling stuff from all over the world. I mean, it would have been just mad. It would have been fun. And it could be that Paul actually was marketing tents from one of those booths right there as being a tradesman. He spent 2.5 to 3 years in Ephesus. And so, it could have been right there in that market. But just the conflict. So that's just one. Second thing is that you'll remember the story in Acts about Demetrius the smith, whose livelihood is making little replicas of Diana or Artemis to market, and how Paul's time there so affected the silver trade that they were going to kill him. So I'll show you the picture in a minute, the very Colosseum that they took his followers to, and we're going to kill him, and then he intervenes and says, hey, can I talk to him? And then they're going to kill him. And then they take him to a fortress. He spent 2 days in a fortress up there just to save him from the crowds. And the crowds are screaming, Artemis of the Ephesians, the god of the Ephesians, Artemis, the god of the Ephesians. And it was so much that the mayor of the city had to come and shut down the whole crowd and send them all home. But it was a big deal because Artemis was such a big part of their culture in everything. Actually, banking took place in the temple to Artemis. It was such a vital part. There were hundreds of prostitutes, both male and female, involved in this goddess of fertility and all of what it meant to worship Artemis or Diana. So if you can just imagine how intricated this is into culture, well, they had like trade unions. And that's why the silversmith thing was such a big deal. They had trade unions, and you couldn't participate unless you were a worshiper and declared your loyalty to Artemis. And so everywhere there's these catch-22s where you're like, yeah, I still need to feed my family. And that's why in Smyrna, which we won't get to today, but the next church that we talk about it, he's like, I see your poverty. I see the situation and the persecution that you're under, because that's actually what standing for Jesus meant, is it wasn't just getting cast out of the synagogue, which also happened, and all of the support structure that ran along with that, but even in the pagan culture, it had huge impact because it restricted you from being able to market your wares and to be able to conduct commerce and just take care of your family. So literally many people became paupers. But when we get to Smyrna, you'll say, I know your poverty, but you're rich. That's for another story, but that's a really beautiful thing. But just as the pressure of this culture, if you could just imagine what it's like. And this is why as I'm walking to the places that the disciples walked, and I'm just like, Holy Spirit, you took a really small group of people and you totally transformed society so that that, eventually in the 4th century, that Rome just says, well, if you can't beat it, join it. And so they incorporated and made it the national religion for the benefits. And persecution stopped, so that was great. But there's, another side to that conversation too. Just the date, John, the bishop of Ephesus, actually started the church of Ephesus, exiled to Patmos by Domitian in AD 95, has a vision of Revelation. So I saw some pretty wild dates, some of them putting it like at AD 65. But the majority of scholars put it later on. So that would have put John, if he was roughly the same age as Jesus, he would have been nearly 100 years old when he died. And we got to go to the place where he was buried. That was actually really special to me because he's my favorite apostle. Not just because he was the only one to die of natural deaths, right? They tried to kill him. That's why he got exiled to Patmos, actually, because they tried to burn him and it didn't work. Similar story with Polycarp. They sent him to a prison island, and he literally lived in a cave for his time that was there. And he actually asked to be buried at a certain place in Ephesus, and so they have a marker for that you can go and visit, and it's really special. I opened my study Bible, and it's got all these pictures, and I'm like, okay, there's another set of ruins. But when I saw this picture in my study Bible when I was reading 1 John, this is the John that wrote that, right, from Ephesus, right, 1 John. And you open it up, and right there is the picture of his tomb, and I'm like, I was just there. Now my study Bible's more useful and more interesting to me now too. So pretty cool. Yeah, pretty cool. So first chapter of Revelation, verses 9 through 20. A little bit of a long section, but it's important for the context of where we're going. So I, John, both your brother and companion in the tribulation and kingdom and patience of Jesus Christ, was on the island that is called Patmos for the word of God and for the testimony of Jesus Christ. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice as of a trumpet saying, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last. And what you see, write in a book and send it to the 7 churches which are in Asia, to Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, to Philadelphia, and to Laodicea. Just a little note on the way passing this to the next verse is that the Lord's Day is not Sunday, never has been. It's totally great for us to come and celebrate together on Sunday, but just to be accurate biblically, the Lord's Day, Friday night to Saturday night, is the Sabbath day. And so I encourage people, there's a lot of life in honoring the Sabbath day. So I encourage people, right? Take the day to rest, take the day to seek the Lord, and then come together and we'll party on the first day. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? We can party any day of the week and gather together and celebrate him, but just to be clear theologically. Then I turned to see the voice that spoke with me, and having turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. In the midst of the 7 lampstands, one like the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the feet, and girded about the chest with a golden band. His head and his hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes like a flame of fire. His feet were like fine brass, as if refined in a furnace, and his voice is the sound of many waters. Hard to imagine what that sounds like, the sound of the voice of many waters. But in what we were talking about at the introduction about his eyes are like a flame of fire. I joke about why we men sometimes are so stilted in emotional expression. But if you don't know a God who's passionate and you're being raised with another, that this is what's acceptable or not acceptable in terms of what you can express. But we serve a passionate God. John walked with Jesus. But if you can just imagine the progression in John's life of how he knew Jesus, and this is what he's getting to know Jesus as first. Now, at this point in his life, and it's an entirely different, dramatically different person. And it goes on to say, he had in his right hand 7 stars, out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, and his countenance was like the sun shining in its strength. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead. But he laid his right hand on me, saying to me, do not be afraid, I am the first and the last. I am he who lives and who was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen. I have the keys of Hades and of death. Write these things which you have seen, and the things which are, and the things which will take place after this. The mystery of the 7 stars which you saw in my right hand, and the 7 golden lampstands, the 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands which you saw are the 7 churches. So back on this progression in the life of John. John meets Jesus. Remember, John and James are brothers. And what were they known as? That was James and John, the hot-headed ones, the sons of thunder. And he meets him in applying his trade. He's a fisherman. Jesus calls him out of that, not out of the institution that you expect that religious leaders would be called out of, but out of the trades, out of people who just worked with their hands, normal, regular people, not particularly wealthy, just average middle-class, hard-working folks. And this is where John engages Jesus. And all of the encounters that he has with Jesus, then he becomes a follower of Jesus. Then Jesus sends him out 2 by 2, and he says, I want you to go heal the sick. I want you to cast out demons, and I want you to tell them how close the kingdom of God is. And so they do, and they see, and they begin to experience of a supernatural life, this power that hadn't been demonstrated before, from an authority that hadn't been demonstrated before. They said of Jesus, I've never seen anybody walking in so much authority. And so John is just being mentored along. And so his personal relationship with Jesus starts with, okay, well, this special guy is calling me out. Then he's empowering me to do things I never thought were even possible. And then he's mentoring me all along this journey. The Last Supper, he's the one with his head on Jesus' chest. There's a special closeness between John and Jesus that's intimate and real and touchable and tangible. And he's rebuked by Jesus. He doesn't say to them, these sons of thunders, when they said, let's call down fire on all these wicked Pilau folks. He doesn't tell him he can't do it. He just challenges his heart. He brings him up to a higher perspective to see what the heart of the Father is for those people who are hurling insults or rocks or whatever at them. And what a crazy thing it is to just like be mentored into, okay, so you're loving these people. And John is the disciple who not only that Jesus loved, but he writes the most about love. So you're reading 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. It's just the most special and beautiful book. But if you read the book of Ephesians that Paul writes to the Ephesians, it's also full of this contrast of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And Paul recognizes, he knows the environment they're in, and that's why he says, put on the full armor of God. Every day, put on the whole armor of God because you're engaged in a spiritual battle. So if you don't, and if you don't have access to that incredible, passionate, fiery-eyed, burning hot love of God for you, then when you're getting insults or worse hurled at you, and I don't think I could probably express it very well, but you probably have all experienced it when somebody's just in your face. Or like, if you've ever been in law enforcement, you see guys who are trying to provoke cops. They just get in their face and goad them and goad them and goad them just to try to get them to, they totally could just whack them, right? They're just trying to get them to do something because then they're going to sue them. Can you just imagine that sort of provocation and insult? And that's really not so different. We live in kind of a cancel culture thing where if you don't do or say the right thing, they just cancel you and remove your YouTube channel. It's cancel culture. But there was a very real cancel culture going on there. If you didn't fit and comply with what the norm was, then the consequences were very real and very tangible. And so this is the city that John's living in. This is the city that Paul is writing to. And it helps us to understand just what this environment is. So the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. The 7 stars are the angels of the church. The word for angel is bishop. So they actually call Polycarp the bishop of Smyrna, which is our next place. But John was considered the bishop of Ephesus. So it's written to the leaders of the regional church. So the church at Ephesus is a large area. I don't actually know what the population was at the time, but I think over 100,000 people. So the church was just a geographical area. Like we have a church on every corner here, but there was a church of the entire area. And so most churches were in people's homes. They met and they did things in public settings at the temple, and they did ceremonial things or participated where they had an area to share with people and to congregate, common areas. But for the most part, church was actually in homes, which is why I love doing what we do on Wednesday nights. Because if you're able to participate, it's actually really special to be able to get together, pray together, little smaller groups, more intimate. And that's honestly a lot of ministry can happen that, you're all going to rush out to lunch afterwards, maybe, right? And miss out on some of the one-on-one time that is easily precipitated, easily happens in a home setting. And so I think that home churches are really special in God's heart. I just say, hey, we have this great tool, so we'll use it while we have it. That's awesome, but that is really special in God's heart. So that's the context. Revelation generally he starts out in the first few verses of Revelation. It's about the unveiling of Jesus. Some people say it's the 5th gospel. So you saw the lion, the ox. You see the different expressions of the 4 gospels of different aspects of Christ's character. And this one is showing Jesus like John hadn't known him before. Can you imagine your best friend, and then when he shows himself in his true glory, where I fall on my face as dead before him? That's hard for me to imagine, but there's something awesome and real about really genuinely coming into the presence of God and seeing him for who he is. Priceless. To understand that he's really, really good. He's totally good. He's so full of grace. He's so kind, but he's also absolutely and totally just. And those flames of fire are going to burn out anything that needs to get burned out. And when we come into the presence of pure light, darkness will get vanquished. And anything that I'm still holding on to might be a little painful when that gets burned out. So better let go of it right now. Holy Spirit, right? Take it out right now. Let there be clean hands and a pure heart. and welcome into that mode, because his judgment is a good thing. His judgment is with love. His judgment is with grace. His judgment is with mercy. So pursue his judgment. This is the Jesus that John didn't know. And this, all of Revelation is the unveiling of this Jesus, who is the triumphant, powerful, he is the King of all kings. He's the Lord of all lords. He's the Alpha and Omega, is the way the first chapter introduced him as. A prophetic book testifying of Jesus. Jesus, the way to the Father. The Father is the destination. So keep that in mind even as we go through this. Jesus is saying, when he walked on earth, he's saying, don't look at me. I'm just doing what I see the Father do. In Matthew chapter 8 is the centurion story that I've shared a few times. But when Jesus says, I haven't seen so great a faith, no, not in all of Israel, he's commending a man who said, I know what it means to be under authority. I tell my soldiers to go, they go. I tell them to come, they come. You don't even need to go. You just say the word and I know it's done. Does that sound like the way you typically define faith? So we may or may not define faith and tie it to simple obedience and tie it to being under authority. But he says it, that's it. I know my role. I know his role. I know he's God, I know I'm not. So I just do what he says. End of story. The more we live like that, the more exciting our adventure will be. Father is the destination. Okay, the 7 churches. Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Here's the picture again, where they're all clustered pretty much on the west coast of Turkey. And this is the temple to Artemis. Really hard to show. There's not much of this existing now when you go, but this is a rendition of it. If you can see the people, 100 yards wide, 150 yards long. A football and a half long, and a football field wide. So that in feet, that's like 440, that's a quarter of a mile long. For a runner, a fast runner, sprinting for 60 seconds can run a quarter of a mile. A fast runner at 60 seconds can run. But that's how long. Just go out there and run as fast as you can for a minute. It's incredibly massive. And this was really the center of culture. This was one of the 7 wonders of the world. It was ornate and beautiful as everything is over there. We don't know all of what this looked like, but just picture that transitioning. Hundreds of prostitutes on duty all the time because she's the goddess of fertility. With the Million Woman March, they did a really significant thing. They mocked up a temple, Ishtar. So similar names changed for the same deity. But she is the pornography, she's abortion, she's promiscuity, she's human trafficking, she's all of that, right? Represented all that. And they would gather together, and I can show you the picture, but this massive marble with columns all winded all the way down to the harbor. They would take and carry this statue down and dip her in the water once a year and come back, because that would make her a virgin again. And they all come back and they'd all have a massive orgy. This is the crazy culture that was Ephesus. This is a picture of Artemis, and they would carry that statue down and dip it once a day, and it would just be thousands of people out. And this group of people are absolutely passionate about worshiping her, such that they're willing to kill people who dip in the pocketbook of this established religion. And they say, Artemis is God of the Ephesians, and shout it over and over. This is the theater where they were shouting. That's exactly how it looks. I took that picture, and it seats 25,000 people. So that's the place where Paul's friends were drug. That one. Paul wasn't. Paul intervened and said, hey, can I speak to the crowd? That whole conversation, but he actually wasn't drug into that theater. But this very theater, they were sacrificed to beasts in part of the persecution in this very theater. So this is what they call the Agora, and that's the place where 4,000 booths, the place where Paul lived when he was there for 2.5 years, was actually right behind here. So when it says that he lived in the house of his friend there and taught out of that house for 2.5 or 3 years, that's where it was, right here off of the marketplace. And can you imagine just what a strategic place that is? People are going and coming. It's just a busy, bustling place all day. And you have just this constant flow of people in and out. And that's the position with which Paul had such dramatic impact on the financial, religious structure of the day. I'm sure it was a wild and very fun place to be. But just again, you're offering incense to Caesar every time you go participate in Caesar's market. Another just example, but even the sidewalks on the far side, all lined with pillars and marble everywhere, even on the sidewalks. This is the walk down to, so down on the far right is actually the theater. And there's another similar one that goes down and is the one where they would carry Artemis down. I didn't get that picture in, but there's another very similar picture that shows the marching towards the Aegean Sea. And that's the very place that Timothy was martyred. We walked over the place where Timothy lost his life, also ministering in Ephesus. Hopefully that gives you some context and you can visualize things a little bit more. So here it is to the church of Ephesus. To the angel of the church of Ephesus write, "These things says he who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, who walks in the midst of the 7 golden lampstands. I know your works, your labor, your patience, and that you cannot bear those who are evil. And you've tested those who say they are apostles and are not, and have found them liars. And you have persevered and have patience, and have labored for my name's sake, and have not become weary. Nevertheless, I have this against you, that you have left your first love." The list of commendations is pretty amazing. In this context, in this culture, with this amount of pressures, with this amount of persecution that just goes with the territory, you've been faithful. You've stood your ground. I commend you for that. But even more important is, but where is your heart towards me? You've lost your first love. This is challenging to me, just like the conversation about fear of the Lord is challenging to me. Maybe it's because I'm a guy who, has had the same permissions given for experiencing and expressing emotion. But sometimes just the depth of that appreciation of the love that God has, of his judgment, of his passion, sometimes it's like, okay, ho-hum. It doesn't impact me the way it should impact me. And just being in his presence and saying, God, would you just help me to have a greater fear of the Lord? John Bevere does a great job expressing this story in his books about how important and essential the fear of the Lord is. But that's what gives us and says, okay, well, if you do this, then all of this will materialize. If we'll just get this, his love for me, his commitment to me, his passion for me, draws out of me a similar response. Do you ever get uncomfortable at worship? Somebody's a little more expressive than you are in worship, and you're like, come on, be a little bit more discreet or a little bit more reverent or a little bit more whatever, right? Sure, don't be so excited about it. Then we'll go to a football game, and people will be painting stuff on their shirts and doing the wave, right? And we're like, oh, yeah, right now this is something you have permission to get excited about. But coming to church, right, you got to put on your nice Sunday best and, don't let out a squeak where you shouldn't. And please don't clap too loud or whatever, right? And so we end up with this just contrast. And we serve a passionate God who says, you know what, there's no barrier I won't overcome in order to seek you out. I'll leave the 99 in order to seek the one who's having a tough time. Anybody been there? Right? I'm really grateful that he sought me out. I'm really grateful that he sought you out because he left the 99 and he so values the one. So that's the passionate God that we serve. And he's saying, okay, so you've got all this down. I know your works. I know your labor. I know you're serving at church. I know you're showing up on Sunday. I know you're doing the things that you need to do to just plug along and connect and make things work. I know your patience. I know that you cannot bear those who are evil and have tested those who say they are apostles and are not. It's commending that, hey, there's a lot of people carrying around titles, asking for money, doing whatever. And God's saying, you know what, filter them. I know that you should have patience for that because the true and authentic represents my character and nature, which is selfless and giving and pouring out my own life. And if you don't detect that, if you're not, then, hey, you know what, God bless you and find another hooey to hang out with. Because that's a character of God. But you've lost your first love.